not be moved. We shall not be moved.
It was very tremendously powerful. I mean, you mustn't think that, for me, the experience of all these campaigns hasn't kept me going, because if you open the newspapers and you attacked every day, it's very discouraging. Then you go to meetings, you feel there's a lot of support, and somebody hits you on the shoulder and says, keep at it. It's worth any number of words of praise from the press officer at the Labour Party or a friendly leading article in The Guardian. You know? I mean, that's what keeps you going. It is the feeling that you're trying to reflect what people's needs for work and good homes and health and education and decent pensions and peace, and that's what it's all about.
I think one example of his innocence, not wickedness, is that he said at the time that that sort of election was a healing process. Now, in fact, as you know, it was the least healing thing. It was tearing the scabs off old wounds, and it was profoundly repulsive to the average elector.
In the summer of 1981, rioting broke out in the inner cities. Brixton, Toxteth and Moss Side were badly affected. In the face of social unrest and rising unemployment, Margaret Thatcher's government became vulnerable, but Labour was fixated with the contest for the deputy leadership of the party.
Here's unemployment going up and up and up. Here's Mrs Thatcher increasing the rents, increasing the prescription charges, cutting the money to local councils, cutting student grants, doing horrendous things to the National Service. And here's the Labour Party, for 6 months, obsessed with who is going to be deputy leader. People are looking at it say they're not fit to run the country.
Go on, Tony. Well, Tony. Cheerio, youngster. Yes.
Despite suffering from a rare nervous condition, Tony Benn took his campaign to the unions that summer of 1981. Union votes were crucial to the success of his campaign, but his appeal was always to the members, bypassing the traditional power structures of the party.
We organised a series of fringe meetings around most trade union conferences, certainly all the big ones, and they proved to be extremely well attended. And fringe meetings were pretty much unknown at many, if not most, trade unions at that stage.
I'll get myself a cup of tea. I've got a sandwich I bought at Preston.
What I did discover as we went round was that the arguments are very compelling. And the contributions were very important. The things that were said were very important. And I suppose one of the biggest meetings was at the ASTMS conference, where Clive Jenkins, who agreed to be photographed like a Roman emperor swimming in a swimming pool and commenting on it. It was a most extraordinary picture.
Good morning, Clive. Isn't the platform, in fact, trying to avoid a firm decision on the Tony Benn, Dennis Healey issue?
Our first approach was that we felt there should not be an election because the country now is in the kind of situation it was when Hitler invaded Norway. Only this time, of course, the enemy's inside.
At a packed fringe meeting, Tony Benn courted the rank and file.
Thanks very much for coming along to this small fringe meeting.
His aim was to persuade one of the largest unions, the ASTMS, to back him and overturn the official position.
You've got to have a socialist perspective. Now, the word socialism is spat out on the media as if it was a sort of disease. They get a picture of somebody, sometimes me, with his hands out and his eyes open. Socialism, they say, and the children are put to bed, and mother has another Ovaltine and settles down to her novel from the Boots Library, and people hope it'll all go away. But that's not how it's pronounced. It is socialism. It's about trying to construct a society around production for need and not just for profit. Around meeting people's needs. That's what it's about.
His improvised oratory won over the union activists. To the fury of the leadership, a ballot forcing the union to back Benn for deputy was carried.
I was livid with rage because I thought someone was coming deliberately to undermine the democratically elected union executive and the line it's taking. But he won that conference over in his fringe meetings, and I I naturally resented what I thought was a breach of our democratic procedures.
Now then, young Frank, how are you then? All right?
By contrast to Tony Benn, Dennis Healey chose to woo Union barons.
Nice to see you, Tom. Yes.
To win, he needed the backing of their bloc votes when the election came in the autumn.
All the more opulent-looking members here are members of our executive.
I know, yes, that's right. I had to work very, very hard going to union conferences, get-togethers all over the country, grubbing up votes, and that's never been an activity. It's rather like fundraising, which I enjoy, but I have to do, you know.
The Dennis Healey I remember from those days is not the avuncular, lovable figure I see around now. It was an old flamethrower.
I always like to look back on the week rather than...
And he was the front man, really, a very effective front man, for what was a machine for the establishment, in rather desperate conditions. And his campaign really consisted of block votes.
I didn't take it for granted at all that I'd win. I knew it would be very closely balanced. It was a very tense period, but it had its amusing side. Now, if the cameras will turn off just for one moment, I'm going to tell you a secret. Put it down. That's right. Thank you. Michael Foot isn't perfect. I'm not perfect. Everybody knows that. Even Tony Benn isn't perfect. Bloody hell.
But despite the occasional amusement, the deputy leadership election rapidly disintegrated into trench warfare.
Overall, it was a nasty period, a nasty campaign, one that reflected no credit on the Labour Party as an open, democratic, comradely organisation, quite the reverse. It showed some of the worst sides of people in politics on the left.
The People's March for Jobs became a march for the deputy leadership, the rival factions vying with one another to be the centre of attention. In their midst, the leader, Michael Foot, seemed unable to impose order on his party.
Michael, who had not only had the great affection of the party, but it became clear that he wasn't up to being leader. He'd also not fixed anything. Now, you can't be a Labour leader unless, to be blunt about it, you're ready to fix things, to ensure that things don't go wrong, and also to work on Murphy's Law, that everything that can go wrong will go wrong, so you have to plan for those eventualities.
Things did go wrong. At rallies in Cardiff and later in Birmingham, Dennis Healey was abused and heckled by supporters of Tony Benn.
Several of those demonstrations were wrecked by Tony Benn's candidature because at many of those meetings people would turn up. Tony Benn could claim he wasn't responsible for them, but he'd incited it. They turned up and wrecked the meetings. We had our great demonstration in Cardiff wrecked by a few, at any rate, supporters of Tony Benn who came to it. They came shouting and denouncing Dennis Healey as if he was some kind of traitor to the Labour movement, which of course was an absolute outrage for anybody to say.
We'd had a rally where we had the anarchists carrying skull and crossbones and the militant carrying the militant tendencies stuff. We even had the positists who thought that, supporting Tony, who thought that socialism would be brought to Britain by being some outer space. I think they were a hangover from his period as Minister of Technology, when he was a great technology nerd. And the sight of this on the television created the image of the Labour Party as extremist and divided, which lasted for another 10 years. It's only really just been overcome by Blair's election.
150,000 men and women.
Don't some of you who've been yelling understand you're playing the Tory game when you play that sort of game?
One of the things which I'll never forgive Tony was not only accepting the support of these people, but being inappropriately pious about it, saying, I don't believe that Speaker should be shouted down. I believe in free speech, but that's nothing to do with me, when he could have, with a single sentence, have told them to leave Dennis Healey alone.
Well, I'm not in favour of breaking up public meetings. And I think it's a ludicrous idea to expect somebody to denounce